This PowerPoint is to help you understand the important role that families play in language and literacy development. And if those things don't occur before children come to school, then as teachers, what we need to do to help them. For a warm-up, take out your phone. If you're at home watching this or someplace, look at some of your text messages if you have a smartphone. Notice the types of language you use or the language that people use when they've sent you a text. Read some to a person near you or read them out loud. Think about the types of sentences that you see, the types of words that are there. Are those very common words? Are they unusual words, or precise words? Is there punctuation involved? Look at now a page from one of your textbooks and read a few sentences there. Compare the language between the text and your textbooks. And how is it different? What do you notice about the sentence length, the sentence structure, the detail that's included? Just an idea for how our oral language is sometimes different than written language. On this PowerPoint, we're going to discuss several different things. The first is the source of the achievement gap and why Minnesota is at risk, the role that the family plays in literacy development, the role that vocabulary plays in literacy abilities, the development of academic language and its impact on school success, the solution for closing the achievement gap. What can we do to close that gap? And then the national attention that's been taking place in the next few, that will be taking place in the next few years to be sure that we're working with children who may be struggling with language abilities. We talk about the achievement gap, and a lot of times people see it just as something dependent on race. And actually that's not the truth. The truth is more about disadvantaged children in economic situations rather than race. The average linguistically advantaged first grader probably knows between 5,000 and 10,000 words orally. So they hear those words, they understand them, they might be able to use them. It doesn't mean that they can read them all, but they at least have been exposed to that many different words. The average linguistically advantaged high school graduate probably knows 50,000 words. So you can see the growth that occurs from that preschool up through high school. However, when we look at disadvantaged students, the linguistically disadvantaged students, they enter and leave school with vocabularies half the size. Why is that, and what makes the difference? What can we do about it? So when does the achievement gap begin? Is it high school, middle school, elementary school, preschool, or before preschool? The answer is before preschool, before we ever see children in educational settings. The families are so critical in shaping their children's literacy development. It has to do with the conversations they have at home, the types of words that they hear and that they use so that they become familiar with that. It's all very, very important before we ever see them again in educational settings. So why do families matter? Here are some reasons. They play critical roles in shaping the language development of their children in the languages used in the home, and as well as whether they go out and about in the community and the types of language they would hear in other areas. Their cognitive abilities, their motivation, which we'll learn is a very important thing with is education important to the family. Are children encouraged to speak and to read? And then also social emotional factors. How does that affect? There is a lot of research to support the theory that language is so important. We're going to just highlight 3 of them on this PowerPoint. The most groundbreaking one is the Hart and Risley study, where they studied children from age 9 months up to 4 years. The Harvard University Graduate School, where they followed students for very long term to see language development, and then some research that was done by Gail Jordan, who was employed at Bethel University at one time. First, let's look at the Hart and Risley study. There is a full book written about their study called Meaningful Differences. This is the cover of the book, and it explains in much more detail about how they conducted the study and the findings that they had, why they even started the study, and they found things that they did not expect to see at all. Here's a graph that kind of shows some of the results from the study, but here's how it worked. They had been working with children in schools, and they noticed that there were some children that came and had such different language levels, even as very young children, and they wanted to see what's the reason for that. When they come to school, why are they so different? So their study actually included 42 families. You can see on the left side of the screen here. They balanced it between race and gender so that those wouldn't be contributing factors. They had 13 high-income families, 10 middle income, 13 low income, and 6 welfare families that agreed to participate in the study, which was a very long-term study as well. What they did is they went into their homes once a month for those several months and years. The same person was there, so the family got to be very comfortable with them when they would come in. And they would sit and just record every conversation and verbal interchange between the parents and the children. Who said what to each person and what was the response, etc. And they found that there were wide differences in the amount of words spoken to children as well as the types of words. The amount of words, first of all, if you look at the chart, in the welfare families and the lower income families, there were many fewer exchanges of language. And those that were exchanged were more negative, telling children what to do, more commands, not conversational kinds of things, and again, very negative things. As they moved up into the working and the professional homes, they found that there was a lot more conversation, children asking parents, parents responding, still a lot of what we might call commands like, it's time to do your homework, it's time to pick up your toys, come to dinner, those types of things, but there was a lot more praise as well. And that really affects the social, emotional welfare of the children. And they found then when they looked at all these that this type of language was very related to the income levels of the families. So that by the time a child is 3 years old, there might be up to a 30 million word gap, just the number of words that have been spoken to that child. This is another chart that shows a similar kinds of thing, just another way to report those findings as you look at the children across in the age of months. And then again, you can see how that trajectory is so different. So by the time they get through high school, why there would be such a difference in the amount of vocabulary words and literacy that children have. They found that they could predict, looking at the vocabulary size of a child that's age 3, how well they would be able to read at age 9. And that is such a huge, huge thing for us to understand and to know, because as the children are very young, before again we see them in a K-12 building, but at preschool, how important it is that families understand and know what a role they play in teaching their child language. So here it shows again a little bit what's the difference in the relationship of the language development. And we see it's such huge, huge difference. So this is just another, again, way of showing the information that was on earlier slides. Okay, what do they hope to achieve by this? As we start to understand that we really have to pay attention to language. There's an initiative to begin a national awareness campaign about the importance of language interaction from the very earliest years, starting at birth. So in letting families know, especially when it's their first child and they may not know these things, how important it is to read to the child, to talk to the child, and much less screen time than what's happening now. If you go into grocery stores or stores, anything, you'll see young children playing with smartphones and iPads, and there's nothing wrong with those to a point. But what are we missing by having the screen time? We're missing a lot of interaction and language, which is where they learn it best, is face-to-face. We want to encourage families then to talk with their children to support their development, and all stakeholders need to be engaged with this. So whether it's the parents, preschool teachers, principals, clubs, any kind of things where we encounter children that we can work on language. A second study that was done, which was a long-term one, they looked at children from age 3 up through high school. That's quite a commitment to follow families and to find families that will stick with you that long. But again, they were able to see a lot of the same things that the Hart and Risley study did, is that impact of the families on the students' reading and literacy abilities. If they don't have good literacy abilities, then it's very much more difficult for them to succeed in high school and college. Okay, this is another chart, again, shows some of the different kinds of ways. If we look, there are 3 kind of columns: home and school experiences, so those things that are going to occur more in the homes and in their classrooms, and then what kinds of skills are developed in those areas, and then school performance, what grade might we see those things occurring. So if you look in the first column where we see the ages of 3 to 6-year-olds, kindergarten are usually 5 and 6-year-olds. That the literacy, they're going to really be working on literacy and understanding literacy, both listening to narrative text, expository text, as well as understanding print. And that print is our words and thoughts written down. And you see that in kindergarten and first grade a lot. Then we go down further and we talk about conversational language. Conversational language is so important because it's a way of communicating, going back and forth between people, responding. That's where you build a lot of language as well, and they hear grammatical structure of our language. And we do a lot of that in the schools, instruction and practice and reading, especially in the kindergarten and first grade years, where we talk about phonemic awareness and phonics, comprehension. And then we talk back to the left side again, extended discourse forms and non-familiar audiences. That's when we get more into our textbooks, where we don't have somebody there face to face to question and ask to understand them. So it's what we call decontextualized language. That's in our books that we read, where we can't talk to the author. The words have to carry the meaning. And that's where we especially get into reading in grade 4 and up. How is academic language different from social or everyday language? Your everyday language is your face-to-face communication as you talk to your friends and your family. You're driving down the road. You're talking on the telephone. Even your texting are those types of things. And we call those tier 1 words. Very common words, usually not very precise, more difficult words, we might say, for young children. It's usually about shared knowledge, where the person we're conversing with knows us. They've been in the same situations. We don't have to give a lot of detail because they know our world and we know theirs. Nonverbal cues, we look at each other's faces, body language to determine what it is that they're meaning. So there's ability to clarify too. We can ask questions or say, I didn't understand that. What was that again? We tend to use more simple language, words, and sentences. Usually it's about more concrete topics, the things of the here and now and things that are happening, which is also less attention demanding. We can be having those kinds of conversations while we're driving, while we're doing other things, and still get meaning from the words. In contrast, when we look at academic language, we call those tier 2 and tier 3 words. There's distance usually between the speaker and the listener, so it could be in textbooks again, or we're listening to a story. Less shared knowledge because there are words that that children might not all know. The words have to carry the message. So for instance, if you give a child a worksheet and it says that they should circle the answer or define the words, those are words that they don't use maybe in their normal conversations. So we have to explain to them what that means. There isn't always clarification available except the teacher who is there to help interpret those things. It's more formal language, more rare words and longer sentences. For instance, we talk about instead of cooking a chicken, that we might roast a chicken, or we might saute something. It's those more rare and precise words that we find in books as children are reading. Often it's a more abstract concept, more about either the past or the future. Lots of things about different kinds of genres. We use different types of language in poetry, for instance, in informative text or in narrative text. And it's much more attention demanding. It's the type of thing that maybe you read a page and you say, I didn't quite get that, and you need to reread it, and you need to be really paying quite a lot of attention to it. Here's another way that sometimes we talk about academic language to children. Academic language is a kind of a secret language that's favored by educators, gives academic advantages to students who speak in ways that model written language. It is more formal, sophisticated, respected, and complex. It's like language was dressed up in a tuxedo. It represents a privileged way of speaking and writing. Think about, for instance, how you might write something, a note to somebody, and then how you might write a research paper. We tend to use different types of language. Academic language has a clear system of purposes with how the information is organized. We learn about that as we write stories or write papers. It's more precise vocabulary to express abstract concepts, more complex ideas. You'll notice that sentences are longer. There are more clauses, descriptive words, those adjectives. Think about a novel where an author has spent a lot of time setting the stage using these descriptive words. There's a lot more information packed within each sentence, so it takes a lot more attention to read and understand what's happening. English learners are another set of students that sometimes we need to think differently about. Some teachers think that but if they ask the parents to speak in English, that will help the child to learn English more quickly. But what happens is many of the parents who are also learning English are going to be using those tier 1 words too, because they're just learning that conversational type of language. And the children are not being exposed to those higher levels, those tier 2 and tier 3. So instead, we want to encourage our EL families to go ahead and converse in their first language, whatever their native language is at home. They typically are going to use more of the tier 2 and tier 3 words in their native language. So that's why we think that's fine. And sometimes EL families feel bad that when they come and they don't speak English well. But we can encourage them that they're doing the best they can by going ahead and speaking in their native language. Here's a continuum between this slide and the next slide. This shows a little bit how this works through school. We start with our informal social conversations, just like we have with our friends and the children might have in kindergarten when they're playing on the playground or in centers. And then we also have informal writing. So we've got the verbal and the written. The informal writing for social purposes might be invitations, an email, a text, things where it doesn't really matter too much the style and the form that we use. Then we move into informal writing or discussion in classrooms, where we're still having some discussions. Maybe they're writing journal entries after they've done an experiment, or we're talking about something in the classroom after we've had some type of an experience. And then we move on to more structured academic discussions. This can be still in kindergarten, where we're talking maybe about a specific unit, thematic unit that we're doing. We've been studying insects or weather. But again, it goes all the way up through school and in life. Then we move to formal presentations, where they might be doing a book report, some type of a presentation as they get into upper elementary. Maybe they're making a PowerPoint that they're presenting to the other students, or a poster, for instance, like in a science project. And then finally, we have the formal writing for academic purposes, just like you do when you're writing your research papers, forum discussions, those kind of things that it's written in a different type of voice as we're using, as we're writing to our different audiences. I would like you to watch this video clip about Sara Lee. It's from a case study from PBS series, so if you can't get it to work, the link to work, you can just type in even misunderstood minds and it will come up for you. It's about a student and her academic language, Sara Lee, that she did fine as she was coming up through school, but she reached a point that suddenly she was really struggling in her content classes. And those classes are the ones where we're going to really see that academic language. So pay attention to how Sara Lee felt about hers, what the teachers were noticing, her mom was noticing, and then what they did to help Sara Lee. Think about now, if we're not together, or this PowerPoint's also used for our hybrid. Discuss Sarah's ability to express herself in conversational or everyday language. How did she do? Well, they have on the video, we can see the types of language that she used. And then in the classroom that one day, when it was videotaped, how she just had a very difficult time getting the words that she had in her head to come out. What's the 4th grade slump? And then also the cause of the achievement gap. So what can we do? Here's some other research. This is the one that we looked on the earlier slide. It was by Gail Jordan. Has done 3 different projects that have gone national. Project EASE is the first one, and that was with kindergarten-age children in the White Bear Lake schools. And this was a program that they really worked with incoming kindergartners and the parents. And they had backpacks that they would send books home with the children, and the parents would read and do some different types of activities with them and send them back. And the difference in both the engagement of the parents and the children were hugely different. This won a National Research Award for Literacy several years ago. The next one she developed was called Building Language Together. And they use these in the preschools, the Bethel preschools that we have. The same thing, really working with families, but at the preschool level, to help them understand that they are their children's first teachers. And then the final one is a brand new one that's sponsored by Scholastic. And this was one, again, where they were working with preschoolers, and families, where the families could also come in and have some training. So there's a lot of research. This is just, again, 3 in this area, but a lot of research being done in studies to show the effectiveness of working with families. Here are some pictures from when they had the final project where they had the parents come in and work with the children. It showed the parents different types of very simple activities that you could make at home, things that you could do with your children that don't have to cost a lot of money. You don't have to buy expensive materials, but they just really let the parents see the importance and how excited the kids get as they're working with print with their families. This next one shows how they really worked with the parents to be engaged in extended conversations. During these evenings, the children and the parents would be separated for a while, and they would talk to the families or the parents about what they could do with children. And then the children were brought back with different materials, and they got to practice the things that they had learned as the parents. So they were just saying, let's have extended conversations, not just one-word answers to them, but ask questions back to the child. What do you think? Those open-ended questions. They also encourage the families to use different words, different kinds of language, big words, like what we might say more precise words, as they talked about things and looked at different materials. We encouraged oral language development. The picture on the left shows a little ring of ideas that they could send home, just ideas of what you could just talk about when you're having dinner together, to get the conversations going and to talk instead of everybody being on their phones or on their own electronics or watching the TV during dinner. You see the little boy to the right has a pretend microphone that he's just using to talk, and the same thing where the parents can talk and encourage those conversations. This page shows some pictures of just encouraging the reading, to sit down, have that laugh time with kids. That's a lot of times children's favorite part when they look back at childhood, are those reading books together. And then retelling, asking the child to say, okay, we just read that story. Let's see if we can tell that story. That really helps with their conversation and helps them engage more deeply with the language. They encourage families to be engaged with writing as well, to empower children that your words and your ideas can be written down, that we can look at them again. And then also just encourage families to have a love of learning. If you look at these pictures, they are so engaged, the parents and the children looking in each other's eyes and having conversations, as sometimes we get so busy at home that we forget to take the time to do that. And then also to have parents included in explanations. So to talk about if they're doing a science experiment, or even if they're just driving down the road and they see something that is unusual, maybe they're driving in the country and they're seeing livestock out in the fields, to talk about those things rather than just ignore them. And then this is again another picture of the parents just engaging with that child and the joy that they had there. So the answer in closing the achievement gap are several things. Start very early. So letting families know from the time they take that child home from the hospital that it's important to talk and read. As preschool teachers, to engage families as well, to be focused on language, to understand that language that they come to school with is going to impact how well the children do in school. No parent wakes up and says, oh, I really don't want my child to do a good job at school. They do. They just don't always know what to do. And then learning ways to scaffold your students when you get them, whatever grade level the students you're going to be working with, what can you do next to help their vocabulary and their language development?